Hey everybody, it's Mr. Hasquin, and I'm back with more things that you should know by being alive. Today is a person you should know, and that's Stephen A. Douglas. I want to cover his life, his rise in politics, his debates with Abraham Lincoln, his role in the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and his overall legacy, especially when it comes to shaping pre-Civil War United States, in the antebellum period. All right, so first of all, let's start with his early life and his rise to power. So Stephen Arnold Douglas was born in 1813 in Vermont. And around the age of 20 or so, he moved west to Illinois, and he worked as a teacher and a lawyer, and then he entered politics rather quickly once he got here. I say here because I'm from Illinois. But anyway, Douglas was ambitious, and he was skilled at, oration and debate, and he earned the nickname the Little Giant due to his rather diminutive stature, but he had a very strong presence. And so he rose through Illinois politics, becoming a U.S. representative, then a senator, and then he was a leading voice in the Democratic Party. In state politics, he had also served as a member of the state Supreme Court and also as our Secretary of State as well. Anyway, but he becomes a leading voice of the Democratic Party on a national stage. Now, Douglas becomes known for championing something called popular sovereignty. And this is the idea that the people of a territory should decide whether or not to allow slavery. So he believed that this approach would ease the tensions between the North and the South, letting democracies settle the issue without Congress having to impose the decision. It was well-intentioned, and it would just prove to be enormously flawed. So, this takes us to 1854, and Douglas sits down and he writes a bill. He authors what will become the law, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which creates the territories of Kansas and Nebraska. It repeals the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which had banned slavery north of the 36-degree 30-minute line, that southern border of Missouri. Instead, the Kansas-Nebraska Act let settlers in those territories decide the slavery question themselves. So this, in turn, will lead to Bleeding Kansas and the rise of John Brown. Bleeding Kansas is a period of violent clashes between pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers. It highlights how popular sovereignty escalated rather than resolve the tensions in the Kansas territory. Now, in 1858, Douglas runs for re-election to the United States Senate against a local politician in Springfield, someone who'd been involved in state politics and actually served a term in Congress, and that's Abraham Lincoln. And so this gives us the Lincoln-Douglas debates. They held 7 debates across Illinois, and they focused on slavery's expansion into the territories. And Lincoln argued that slavery was morally wrong and should not expand. Douglas defended popular sovereignty, arguing that locals should decide. Excuse me. Now, Douglas wins the Senate race, but the debates elevate Lincoln to national prominence, and it sets the stage for the 1860 presidential election. It actually propels him onto the Republican ticket. So, in 1860, Douglas ran for president as the Northern Democratic candidate. So the Democratic Party had split. You had Southern Democrats, and they nominated John C. Breckinridge. And Douglas was the only candidate to campaign across the country, and he urged, we need to keep the Union together. James Buchanan was kind of a do-nothing president at this point, and so you had these 4 candidates vying for the nomination. Now, Douglas finishes second in the popular vote, but he finishes last in the Electoral College, and Abraham Lincoln wins the presidency. Now, in his final years, Southern states begin to secede from the Union, and Douglas stands up firm for the Union, even offering support for his rival and encouraging national unity. But Douglas died in June of 1861, just after the Civil War began, and he was only 48 years old when he passed. So, why do I bring up Stephen A. Douglas? Why does he matter? Stephen A. Douglas was a skilled debater and a politician. This tradition in the Senate coming from Henry Clay and Daniel Webster, and so on. He's also a central figure in the debates over slavery's expansion. He's an advocate for popular sovereignty, whose policies unintentionally deepened national divides. His rivalry with Lincoln and the fallout from the Kansas-Nebraska Act helped shape America's path to the Civil War. Stephen A. Douglas tried to hold the Union together through compromise, but the issue of slavery proved too explosive for any type of moderation or mediation. I'd appreciate it if you learned anything new today, to like, follow, comment, share for more things that you should know by being alive, because understanding men like Stephen Douglas helps us see how our leaders' choices can shape a nation's path, and sometimes in ways they never intended. Thanks for watching.